brother!
She slapped the side of the flashlight a few times, finally coaxing the beam to return. Hey, easy now. That's our only light. I muttered an unkind word beneath my breath. All of this was her idea. I hadn't wanted to come at all. But when a cute girl asks you to go explore a deserted building at night, especially when it's just the two of you, well, there's no turning that down. Her eyes sparkled above a mischievous smile.
You're not scared, are you?
I stood silent for longer than I should have. Terrified. Pushing the thought back, I forced a smile. Doing my best to act cool, I shrugged my shoulders and gestured with one hand. Not at all. She let out a giggle that stirred my hormones and compelled me to follow. This old, run-down building had been around for as long as I could remember. It was on the edge of town, out of the way of anything, really, so I'd only seen it a handful of times. My family would occasionally drive past it when I was a small child. Gazing through the windows of their car, I'd always been troubled but fascinated by how it appeared. An almost perfect cube, reaching dozens of stories high. Paint flaked from its surface in dull, multicolored layers to expose crumbling red brick beneath. Withered, dead trees and bushes stood sentinel on the thin strip of what had probably been lush grass bordering the foundation. All of it closed off behind a high, chain-link fence bearing the ominous, tempting sign of Keep Out. A dull, yellow disk of light swept across the fence as her mouth twisted.
Someone told me there was a spot where you could get through without having to climb.
Every so often, I would catch the scent of her perfume. Flowery was the only description that came to mind. Circling to the side of the building, past a too small parking lot for the number of people that would have worked here. An opening in the fence appeared that had obviously been made by those wanting to explore. Tess had no trouble bending her petite frame through. I wasn't so lucky. A quick smile came to her as I awkwardly forced my body into the gap, having to push metal off my back in a supremely ungraceful manner. My shirt caught on one of the cut ends, causing my face to flush even more than it already was. Finally, I wiggled through, standing with hands on knees while taking loud, ragged breaths. She motioned with the flashlight, urging me to follow. Cursing my awkwardness, I walked behind her, fighting the urge to not constantly stare at her legs. Up close, the building's exterior was even more weathered than it had appeared from the road. There was hardly any mortar or paint covering the brick at ground level. What did remain was thin and powdery. Large chunks had fallen to the ground, leaving the brick to crumble. The dry, dead oak trees stood in too perfect formation, centered and equally spread between building and fence. When they had been alive, they must have been beautiful. Branches spread and filled with leaves to cast a verdant, dappled path for those beneath. Now, under a full moon that slid amongst the clouds, it looked like a cemetery.
Have you heard the story of this place?
I shook my head as brittle twigs and leaves cracked under my feet. And the smile came through her voice.
This was some sort of company, really big, made lots of money during the 70s. Its president had his own office on the top floor. Not just a single room or anything like that either. It took up the entire floor. Then one month, they didn't earn as much. It happened again the next month, then the one after, and so on. In his mind, the only reason this could be happening was because of spies, corporate espionage, competitors who were jealous of their success. He started adding more security, metal detectors, key cards, surveillance cameras, armed guards, everything he could think of to stop the losses. Nothing worked though, and profits continued to shrink. Then it came out they had actually lost money. That's when the meetings started happening, every day. Workers pushed back, telling him that he couldn't treat his employees like this. There were no spies, and all the security was costing them more than anything. None of it was their fault. He wouldn't hear any of it.
My hand reached up to push a branch away from my face. How do you know all of this? She paused a moment, looking back at me.
My grandmother was the president's secretary.
I didn't say anything as we continued walking. Coming into view, one of the oaks had fallen into the building. A large disc of roots stood at a steep angle, the dirt between them having washed away long ago. Where it had been, now rests a crater filled with brackish water. Above, the trunk had broken through one of the windows on the 3rd floor. Tess paused for a moment, then walked under the massive trunk. As I was about to follow, I stopped, choosing to walk around instead. Suddenly, the flashlight swung towards me. A glimmer off the water caused me to look down and see my reflection staring back. Deep shadows crossed my face from the light, turning it into a vision of fleshless bone.
Hey,
She shouted, making me look up.
are you having second thoughts?
I shook my head.
Good, because I want to see what's in there. I don't want to be alone.
Turning the light away, she continued forward. I looked back into the pool, now only seeing dark shadows and vague shapes. Letting my eyes readjust, I ran to catch up. She took a quick glance to make sure I was still behind her, then smiled.
One day, the vice president didn't show up for work, and no one knew why. Lots of people thought he had gotten fed up with the situation and walked out. My grandmother didn't think that would have happened, though. The VP had been there since the beginning, helped build the company to what it had become. He and the president were best friends. At least, that was the impression they gave. Whenever someone asked about what had happened to him, the president shrugged his shoulders, said he hadn't heard anything.
We stopped in front of large, wooden doors marking the main entrance. One was slightly open, offering a view to the darkness inside. Tess walked through, shining the light.
And that's when the rumors started. Late at night, when almost everyone else was gone, the president would still be here. The lights to his office still on. One time, a janitor saw him behind the building, where the parking lot is now, burying something. The janitor asked what he was doing out there at that hour.
Her face rocked back and forth as she mimicked the voice of an old man.
Just getting rid of some old documents I don't need because my shredder wasn't working.
I laughed, but not because of her impression.
The next day, concrete was poured over that entire area, and construction started.
I shook my head. And nobody said anything?
They did, all the time to my grandmother. But he was rich. Cops wouldn't even so much as question him. She told us how there were a lot of teenage runaways then, too, and that the cops never looked for any of them. So why would they be concerned about an old man? Probably just having a midlife crisis or something.
I finally turned my attention to the inside of the building. High above, columns arched into the ceiling. What had once been an opulent chandelier had broken free and was now lying in a pile of twisted glass and metal on the floor. We walked around it. What glass remained in place sent pinpoints of dim light dancing across the dirt-stained walls. Cobwebs hung in heavy clumps between every surface, years of dust caught by their silken strands. On either side of the room were reception tables, tops made of thick, dark wood that had been stained to contrast the pale facade on the face, bearing some sort of diamond pattern relief. A spot of reflected light from the chandelier landed on Tess's face, lighting her eyes.
Other people started leaving. Lots quit outright, leaving after lunch and never coming back. Some actually called in saying they wouldn't be showing up. One guy stormed into the president's office, yelling and screaming, ranting about how the company was going under and it was all his fault. Security came in and shot him right there in the office. My grandmother saw the whole thing.
I shook my head as we walked to the back of the lobby. Between two arching staircases, a rusted pair of elevator doors stood almost entirely shut.
There were also a lot of people that disappeared, just like the VP. One day they were there, the next gone without a word. And all the while, security became more strict. No one allowed to leave their desk, except for designated breaks. Only going with a specified group to the bathroom? More armed guards, more restrictions.
Taking careful steps, we climbed up one of the twisting sets of stairs, bringing us to a long hallway with evenly spaced doors on either side.
Other rumors started spreading about the president holding occult ceremonies in his office. People started going wild when they heard those. That must have been what happened to all those employees that had gone missing, they whispered. Blood sacrifices and pacts with otherworldly demons designed to return the business to its glory. Then one day, the building was closed. No warning or anything. People showed up, and the door was locked.
With the dull yellow light, the hallway looked endless. Dust hung in the air, hardly moving as we passed. As I followed, I noticed her perfume again. Tess, if you know all this, why'd you want to come here? She moved the beam into one of the rooms that's door had fallen. Inside, a large conference table dominated the center. Around it, chairs were haphazardly placed. What had been fine, supple leather was now cracked and flaking off the fabric backing. Looking back, she bit her lip, then smiled.
Aren't you curious about ghosts of the past?
I stared at her bottom, forgetting the ruins around me for a second. No, not really. She turned, smiling as she noticed my eyes lingering on her.
Maybe because it's part of my family's story.
A blur of movement came from under the desk. Honing in, the light revealed a pair of small, beady eyes. The shriek that came from Tess sent the dust vibrating for a moment, only for it to return to its listless drifting. It's okay. Placing my hands on her shoulders, I felt my pulse quicken. Just a rat. Her body shuddered.
I hate rats.
Without saying anything, we left the room and continued down the hallway. Most of the rooms were similar to the first we had just seen. Large conference rooms with a central table, surrounded by high-backed chairs in various states of decay. Turning a corner, weathered frames of what were once large glass doors stood. Stepping through the pile of shards, dozens of melamine tables and plastic chairs stood in loosely organized rows. Along the back wall was a rusting metal bar countertop that showed a kitchen behind. Hungry? My smile faded as she looked back with confusion. Sorry, I was trying to make a joke. Her face softened as our hands came together. I returned the smile, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. Walking between the tables, half-eaten plates of food still sat in front of some of the chairs. Shriveled, barely recognizable bits of something that had once been edible. Forks and knives lay beside and on them, some looking as though they had been left in the middle of their meal. A spoon rested inside a bowl, with a dark brown film coating the bottom. From the end of the spoon's handle, a spider web ran to the table's surface. I stopped and stared. Didn't you say the building was closed when everyone came to work in the morning? She nodded slowly.
That's what grandmother said.
Involuntarily, I took a step back. Doesn't look like they shut the place down.
This looks like they were here, and
Tessa's voice trailed off. What happened? I started walking towards the kitchen. The bar along the back wall was just like the sort that were in a school cafeteria. Large vats and warming bins that held several servings of food to be doled out to a passing tray. A few of the metal bins still held vaguely recognizable contents. Mashed potatoes, green beans, discs of some sort of meat that had been submerged in gravy. At the end of the bar was a rusted door guarding entry beyond. Trying the handle, I was surprised to find it turned and open, though with quite a bit of effort. Metal prep tables took up the first few rows. Behind were stoves, then stacks of ovens and racks holding an assortment of bowls and utensils. Tess moved the light around, carefully looking at everything.
it looks like they were in the middle of a meal service.
Walking to the back, I opened one of the refrigerators. Various cuts of meat rest on the shelves, carefully organized. A rancid smell rolled out that almost made me vomit. Slamming the door shut, my body shook with a fit of coughs. That was a mistake.
Oh my god!
My head snapped towards Tess. Behind one of the preparation stations, she stood frozen, looking down. Rushing to her, I saw it. The remains of a person. Luckily, it was only the bones. A chef's hat rests on top of the skull. It was as if they had simply fallen to the floor while they were cooking. I took her hand, giving a gentle pull. Come on. She stood, continuing to stare down at the remains.
Shouldn't we tell someone? The police?
For a moment, I looked down, then shook my head. If they didn't do anything before, they won't now. Besides, we had nothing to do with this. With a slow nod, she turned, walking with me out of the kitchen. Going back into the hall, we continued. Passing more conference rooms, we came to a pair of large doors slightly opened. Tess walked in, shining the light on the far wall. An oval map of the world adorned the entire surface in dingy, faded paper. Spots had been worn to the walls, with faded scraps clinging on. Over Australia, it hung, torn down by someone or something. A dark brown spatter ran across the Atlantic Ocean, the larger droplets having run down several feet in narrow ribbons. A 5-pointed star sat on top of our town, its name in thick, block print. Other places across the globe had smaller, duplicate stars with proportionally sized writing, signifying their place as arms of the central office. Perhaps half a dozen stars were spread throughout East and Central Asia, a few in South America, and one on each coast of the United States. I shook my head, trying to gain a sense of significance from the map. What exactly was this business?
My grandmother never really said. She was always so vague when it came to talking about this place.
Away from the map, part of the ceiling had fallen, creating a path to the floor above. I gestured towards the pile. Want to see what's up there? Her mouth pressed flat before giving a hesitant nod. The pile was a jumble of broken desks and tables. Though we had to scramble across a few spots, it was much easier than what it looked like from below. Luckily, everything was stable and gave good footing and handholds. After a few minutes of climbing, our heads poked into the space above the conference room. It turned out to be another room with dozens of cubicles, each containing a wall-mounted desk that occupied 2 of the sides. Most had rolling chairs that were pushed under one of the desks or in the center of the cubicle. Unlike the opulent, comfortable pieces in the conference rooms below. These chairs were hard, molded plastic, the kind that were cheap and easy to mass produce. Several of the cubicles had typewriters, some still with paper held in the cassette. More rats scurried from the light. Tess made a sound, but not the same scream as before. Exiting the room led to another hallway. It looked similar to the one we had just gone through in the floor below, but the doors were much smaller and packed close together. Picking a room at random, we entered. It could have been any of the ones we were just in. The same style of cubicles lining opposing walls. But instead of typewriters, these ones held old, bulky computers with small screens. I let out a sharp breath. Whatever they did here must have been making tons of money for there to be this many computers back then. She nodded in silent agreement, moving forward. Each room we saw was a copy of the last. More cubicles, more computers. After a while, I lost count of how many we had seen. There wasn't an end to them. Walking through the next door, a mass of dusty cobwebs stretched across my face. For several seconds, I tried pulling them away, strands crackling loudly as they came off. Shining the light ahead, she tapped my shoulder.
What's that?
Removing a glob of web from my mouth, I saw faint light coming from one of the cubicles. Frowning, I moved ahead, finding a monitor that was powered on. We looked at each other, then back at the screen. Where is this getting power from? The question hung, unanswered between us. Faint lines of phosphor green text shone through a thick layer of dust. Wiping it clear caused sparks of static to leave behind a path of circles just off the tips of my fingers. Ghosting on the glass showed where the static image had been permanently burned into the screen long ago. 2. M. Bader. From D. Flogan. How much longer do you think we can keep going with these kinds of numbers? Sure, the meeting today was closed door, but you could hear P and VP screaming at each other. Couldn't make out everything they were saying, but VP was definitely questioning what's been done lately. For everyone's sake, I hope they start listening to him. I'm sick of having to flash my badge at a machine gun-toting idiot when I only get 5 minutes to piss twice a day. My heart began beating faster. Looking outside the cubicle, I saw light coming from another spot further down. Another computer, still turned on. All work and no pay make me really angry. When will the madness stop?
Hey.
Tess grabbed my shoulder, guiding my attention to the rows of cubicles. Most had light spilling into the walkway. 2. W. Richard. From G. David. Boy and I are going camping this weekend. Feel like coming along? Just be careful when you have your cigar. Every time you do, I see him looking at you. Don't want him getting any bad ideas or habits. I looked at her as we moved to the next cubicle. Where are they getting power from? She shook her head, wiping dust off the next screen. The unholy demons have been released and made this their home. Now, they lurk in the shadow, feasting upon our life essence. Let them who hath unleashed this evil feel the judgment and reckoning from above. Another message showed as my hand wiped the glass. Only thing I like about here is the Taco Tuesday buffet. Going to eat so goddamn many of them next week. We moved to another. It's watching there from the shadows. It thinks I don't notice, but I do. Every time I try to get a better look, it sinks back. The hair on my neck stood as I looked around. I think we should leave.
Yeah.
She nodded before quickly walking the way we had come. Pushing aside a tangle of cobwebs, we made our way back into the hallway. After a few moments, she paused, passing the faint beam of light between two doors, then settling it on one.
I think this is the room that had the way to the floor below.
Both of us walked in. I wasn't sure if she was right, but there wasn't a good reason for me to believe she was wrong either. The cubicle-filled room looked just like all the others. We moved slowly, checking each space to make sure we didn't accidentally pass by the way out. Chill ran through me, passing one of the cubicles. With a quick glance, I looked in. Nothing here. Another cubicle had light coming from it. Stepping inside, I cleared the dust off the monitor. 2. Global Export-Import, null users. From R. Villman. To everyone here on the team at GXI headquarters. As all of you are aware, we have been unable to meet profit goals since the second quarter of last year. Many steps have been taken in order to return us to projected numbers through increasing productivity. However, these have been met with some resistance by employees. I want to personally assure everyone that the company has your best interest in mind. These steps are necessary, and we all need to pull together as a team for us to return to where we need to be. The security measures that have been put in place are not only intended to increase productivity and personal well-being, but also eliminate the espionage that our security personnel has determined to be present. And if you are aware of anyone engaging in this sort of activity, or have suspicions of a person and/or persons acting in an unloyal way, please contact HR immediately to report them. Sincerely, Rich, HR Lead. My eyes lingered on the screen. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Rising up, I looked for Tess, but didn't see her. Where did she go? She was right here. With a sigh of relief, the dull yellow light shone from one of the cubicles a few units down. When I looked in, it was just the flashlight sitting on the desk next to the computer. Dust cleared from the screen. I see you. Frantic, I picked up the light, searching all the spaces nearby. Tess? Where are you? The only response was silence. Tess, come on. Let's get out of here. My shouts bounced back to me through the floating dust. On the edge of my vision, darkness began closing in. Each breath was faster than the last. Finding the exit to the room, I went back into the hallway, shining the light in both directions. All I saw was door after identical door lining both walls.